The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of Anthony Wilson's downtown office. He stood by the window, taking in the view of the city he'd grown to love over the past 15 years. At 42, Anthony had built his investment firm from nothing into one of the most respected in the region. Today marked a special milestone. The paperwork finalizing his acquisition of Westside Community Bank had just been signed. "Congratulations again, Mr. Wilson," said his assistant, placing a stack of documents on his desk. "The board seemed quite impressed with your vision for community banking." Anthony smiled, turning away from the window. "Thanks, Diane. It's been a long time coming." He picked up the folder containing the official ownership documents and ran his fingers over the embossed logo. This wasn't just another business acquisition for him. Westside Community Bank had been a fixture in his neighborhood growing up, though his own family had rarely felt welcome there. "Will you be heading to the main branch today?" Diane asked, already knowing the answer. Anthony had discussed his plans with her for weeks. Yes, but not as the new owner. Not yet. Anthony loosened his tie and slipped off his suit jacket. From the closet in his office, he pulled out a simple navy button-up shirt and a pair of jeans. "I want to see how things really operate when nobody knows who I am." Diane nodded, understanding completely. "The real customer experience?" "Exactly." Anthony changed quickly and looked at himself in the small mirror on his office wall. The transformation was striking, from power suit to everyday man in minutes. His watch, however, remained on his wrist, a gift from his grandfather and a personal reminder of how far he'd come. "How do I look?" he asked, turning to Diane. "Like any other customer," she replied with a smile. "They'll never suspect you're the one who signs their paychecks." Anthony grabbed his keys and phone. "That's the idea. I'll check in later." The drive to the downtown branch took about 20 minutes. Anthony parked his car, not his usual luxury sedan, but a modest hatchback he kept for days like this, and walked the last block to the bank. The familiar blue and silver sign of Westside Community Bank hung above the entrance, slightly worn around the edges. Anthony made a mental note to refresh the signage as part of the rebranding he had planned. As he pushed through the revolving door, the cool air of the bank's interior greeted him. The lobby was busier than he expected for a Tuesday morning. About a dozen customers waited in line for the 3 tellers working the counter, while others sat in chairs along the wall, waiting to meet with personal bankers. Anthony observed everything carefully: the slightly outdated interior, the worn carpet near the entrance, the water cooler with no cups nearby, small details that spoke volumes about the current management's attention to customer experience. The bank wasn't in poor condition, but it lacked the warmth and welcoming atmosphere Anthony envisioned. He joined the line, standing behind an elderly woman who clutched her deposit slip tightly. In front of her, a young couple discussed mortgage options in hushed tones. Anthony pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while continuing to observe the operation around him. From behind the glass partition that separated the teller area from the bank offices, a man in his 50s emerged, adjusting his red tie. He had a stern expression as he spoke to one of the bank associates, pointing toward the growing line with obvious disapproval. The name tag on his chest pocket read, "Thomas Reynolds, Branch Manager." Reynolds scanned the line of waiting customers, his eyes moving quickly until they landed on Anthony. There was a brief moment of assessment, taking in Anthony's casual clothes and relaxed posture, before Reynolds turned away, clearly determining that Anthony wasn't someone who required his immediate attention. The line moved slowly. Anthony watched as Reynolds personally greeted a man in an expensive suit who had just walked in, escorting him past the line directly to a private office. The contrast wasn't lost on Anthony, who had experienced such treatment differences throughout his life. When the elderly woman in front of him finished her transaction, Anthony stepped forward to the teller window. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile. "I'd like to speak with someone about your premium banking services, please." The young teller, whose name tag identified her as Lisa, looked slightly uncomfortable. Premium services usually require an appointment, sir. Let me check if anyone is available." She picked up her phone and dialed an extension, speaking quietly before hanging up. "Mr. Reynolds will be with you shortly. You can wait in the seating area." Anthony thanked her and moved to the chairs along the wall. He watched as Reynolds finished with the well-dressed client, shaking hands enthusiastically before escorting him to the door. Only then did Reynolds glance toward the waiting area, his eyes finding Anthony. With visible reluctance, Reynolds approached, clipboard in hand and a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning. I'm Thomas Reynolds, the branch manager. I understand you're inquiring about our premium services." His tone was professional but cool. Anthony stood and extended his hand. "Yes, I am. I've recently moved some investments and I'm looking to establish a new banking relationship." Reynolds shook his hand briefly, his grip noticeably limp. "I see. Well, our premium services do require a substantial minimum balance. Perhaps I could tell you about our basic checking accounts first?" The assumption was clear, and Anthony had to work to keep his expression neutral. "Actually, I'm specifically interested in your wealth management options. I've heard good things about Westside's investment portfolio." Reynolds's eyebrows raised slightly, skepticism evident in his expression. "Our wealth management services are for established clients with significant assets. The minimum investment is quite substantial." "I understand," Anthony replied calmly. "That won't be an issue." Reynolds seemed to grow more impatient. "Sir, these services typically cater to clients with portfolios in excess of 7 figures. Perhaps another institution might better suit your needs?" He glanced pointedly at Anthony's casual attire. Anthony met his gaze steadily. "I'd still like to hear about what you offer." With a sigh, Reynolds glanced at his watch. "Unfortunately, I don't have any openings today for a full consultation. Our premium services advisor is fully booked for the week. I could schedule you for next Tuesday if you're still interested." His tone suggested he expected Anthony to decline. "Next Tuesday would be fine," Anthony replied, pulling out his phone to check his calendar. "Morning or afternoon?" Reynolds seemed surprised by the response. "Afternoon. 2 o'clock. He jotted something on his clipboard. "I'll need your name and contact information." "Anthony Wilson," he said, providing his personal cell number rather than his business line. At the sound of his name, Reynolds showed no reaction, confirming what Anthony already suspected. The branch manager had no idea who he was, despite the fact that the acquisition had been finalized that morning. Clearly, upper management hadn't communicated the change to branch-level employees yet, exactly as Anthony had requested. "Well, Mr. Wilson, we'll see you next Tuesday then." Reynolds handed him a generic business card. "If you have any questions before then, you can call our customer service line." "Thank you for your time," Anthony said politely, pocketing the card. As he turned to leave, Anthony noticed a young bank employee watching the interaction with obvious discomfort. Her expression suggested she'd witnessed the entire exchange and recognized the dismissive treatment. Outside, Anthony paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the bank that now belonged to him. The visit had been even more revealing than he'd anticipated. The divide between how different customers were treated was stark and all too familiar. He pulled out his phone and called Diane. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "About as expected," Anthony replied, walking toward his car. "Schedule a branch manager's meeting for tomorrow morning." "And Diane?" "Make sure everyone attends. Consider it done," she replied. "Will you be introducing yourself as the new owner?" Anthony smiled slightly as he unlocked his car. "Oh yes, I think it's time for Mr. Reynolds and the others to meet their new boss." He started the engine, already planning the changes he would implement. This bank would become what it should have been all along, a place where everyone, regardless of appearance or background, received the same respect and opportunities. Anthony hadn't bought Westside Community Bank just as a business investment. He'd bought it to transform it. The following morning, Anthony arrived at his office earlier than usual. The sky was still tinged with pink as he settled at his desk, reviewing his notes from yesterday's visit to the bank. Each observation was meticulously documented: the worn carpet, the empty water cooler, Reynolds's dismissive tone, the young employee's uncomfortable expression. Small details that painted a larger picture. "Coffee?" Diane appeared at his door holding 2 steaming mugs. "You're a lifesaver," Anthony said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Is everything set for the meeting?" "Yes, sir." 10 o'clock at the main branch conference room. All 15 branch managers confirmed their attendance. She placed a folder on his desk. "Your suit is pressed and ready in the closet, and I've prepared profiles on each manager as you requested." Anthony nodded, opening the folder. Thomas Reynolds' profile was on top. 53 years old, 22 years with Westside Community Bank. the last 8 as manager of the downtown branch. His performance reviews showed consistent results, nothing outstanding but nothing concerning either. The branch maintained steady profits under his leadership. Steady isn't enough anymore, Anthony murmured, more to himself than to Diane. Pardon, sir. Anthony looked up. Just thinking out loud. This bank has been doing the bare minimum for years. Steady profits, steady customer base, but no growth, no innovation, and apparently no emphasis on equal service. He flipped through more profiles, noting the lack of diversity among the management team. Out of 15 branch managers, only 3 were women and only 2 were people of color. The bank's customer base, however, was far more diverse, especially in certain neighborhoods. There's a disconnect, Anthony said, closing the folder, between who they serve and who makes the decisions. That's why they needed you, Diane replied simply. Anthony smiled at her confidence in him. Let's hope today is the first step toward fixing that. At 9:30, Anthony changed into his charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt, and blue tie. The transformation was complete, from yesterday's casual customer to today's bank owner. As he straightened his tie, he thought about the looks on the managers' faces when they realized who he was. Especially Reynolds. Car's waiting downstairs, Diane informed him, handing him his briefcase. Your executive team will meet you at the bank. The drive to the main branch took only 15 minutes. Located in the heart of the financial district, the Westside Community Bank headquarters was more impressive than its branches. A 10-story building with the bank's logo prominently displayed on its glass facade. In the lobby, Anthony was greeted by his executive team, 5 professionals he'd handpicked to help lead the bank's transformation. They rode the elevator to the top floor in comfortable silence, each preparing for the meeting in their own way. The conference room was already filled with people when they arrived. 15 branch managers sat around a large oval table chatting among themselves. Anthony noticed Thomas Reynolds near the head of the table, laughing with another manager. None of them had met Anthony yet. The acquisition had been handled through the board and upper management, with strict confidentiality agreements in place. The room fell silent as Anthony and his team entered. The regional director, William Parker, rose to make the introductions. Good morning, everyone, Parker began, his voice carrying across the room. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, Westside Community Bank has recently undergone an ownership change. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to the new owner and CEO, Mr. Anthony Wilson. Anthony stepped forward, scanning the faces around the table. Most showed polite interest or curiosity. When his eyes met Reynolds, he saw a flicker of confusion, quickly replaced by shock as recognition dawned. Thank you, William, Anthony said, his voice calm and measured. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I look forward to working with each of you as we guide Westside Community Bank into its next chapter. He moved to the head of the table where a presentation screen was set up. Reynolds, who had been sitting nearby, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face now notably pale. Before we discuss the future, Anthony continued, I want to share why I chose to acquire this bank. Westside has been a fixture in our communities for over 50 years. My own grandmother used to walk me past the Cherry Street branch every Saturday morning. He paused, letting the personal connection sink in. But despite its long history, this bank has fallen short of its potential. Anthony clicked a button and the screen displayed graphs showing the bank's stagnant growth over the past decade. These numbers tell part of the story. Steady but not growing. Safe but not innovative. Another click showed customer satisfaction surveys. These tell another part. Our customers are not unhappy, but they're not loyal advocates either. He moved around the table slowly as he spoke. But what these numbers don't show is the customer experience. The real experience that varies dramatically depending on who walks through your doors. Anthony stopped directly behind Reynolds' chair. Yesterday I visited the downtown branch as a customer. Dressed casually with no announcement, no special treatment. I wanted to experience what our everyday customers experience. Reynolds' shoulders tensed visibly. A few managers exchanged glances, sensing something significant was unfolding. What I found was disappointing but not surprising. Anthony continued, returning to the front of the room. I was treated with thinly veiled skepticism. My interest in premium services was dismissed without exploration. I was essentially told to take my business elsewhere because I didn't look the part of a wealthy client. The room was completely silent now. Reynolds stared down at the table, unable to meet Anthony's gaze. "Mr. Reynolds," Anthony said directly, causing the manager to look up with visible dread. "You had no way of knowing who I was yesterday." "That's precisely the point. None of us know who our customers really are when they walk through those doors. We don't know their net worth, their influence, their potential, and more importantly, it shouldn't matter." Anthony clicked to a new slide showing the bank's mission statement. "Our mission claims we serve all community members with dignity and respect." Yesterday, that mission failed. He looked around the room, meeting each manager's eyes. "I didn't buy this bank simply as a business investment. I bought it because I believe in what it could be. A true community institution that serves everyone equally, that helps build wealth across all neighborhoods, that sees potential in every customer who walks through the door." Anthony moved to his seat at the head of the table and sat down. "Starting today, everything changes. Over the next few months, we'll be implementing new training programs, new customer service protocols, and new community outreach initiatives. We'll be renovating branches, updating systems, and most importantly, changing our culture." The tension in the room was palpable. Some managers looked inspired, others concerned, a few defensive. Reynolds remained rigid in his seat, his discomfort evident to everyone. "I believe most of you are good bankers," Anthony continued, his tone softening slightly. "But I need you to be more than that. I need you to be community leaders. I need you to see every customer as valuable, not just the ones in expensive suits or with large account balances." He opened a folder in front of him. "You'll each receive detailed information about the changes coming to your branches. Some will be immediate, others will roll out over time. My team and I will be visiting each location personally in the coming weeks." Anthony looked directly at Reynolds again. "After yesterday's experience, I've decided to start with the downtown branch. Mr. Reynolds, I'll be at your location tomorrow morning to begin assessing what changes are needed." Reynolds swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." "Of course." For the next hour, Anthony and his team outlined their vision for the bank's future. They discussed community reinvestment, small business loan programs focused on underserved neighborhoods, financial literacy workshops, and staff training initiatives. The energy in the room gradually shifted from tension to cautious optimism as the comprehensive plan unfolded. As the meeting concluded, Anthony stood once more. "Change isn't easy. I understand that. Some of you may not be comfortable with the direction we're heading. If that's the case, we can discuss your options privately. But for those who share this vision, who believe banking can be both profitable and equitable, I promise you'll find this journey rewarding." The managers filed out of the conference room, many stopping to introduce themselves personally to Anthony. Reynolds lingered uncertainly at the back of the group, clearly unsure whether to approach or slip away unnoticed. When the room had emptied except for Anthony's team, Reynolds finally stepped forward, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and apprehension. "Mr. Wilson," he began, his voice slightly strained, "about yesterday, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. It wasn't my intention to—" Anthony raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Mr. Reynolds, we both know exactly what happened yesterday. What matters now is what happens tomorrow, and the day after that. I'll see you at your branch at 9 sharp. Reynolds nodded, recognizing the dismissal. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." As the door closed behind Reynolds, Anthony turned to his team. "Well, that went about as expected. Do you think they'll adapt?" asked his chief operations officer. Anthony looked at the closed door. "Some will, some won't. But by this time next year, Westside Community Bank will be unrecognizable, in all the best ways." The downtown branch of Westside Community Bank buzzed with nervous energy the next morning. Word had spread quickly among the staff that the new owner would be visiting, and that somehow their manager, Thomas Reynolds, had already gotten off on the wrong foot. The usual morning routine was disrupted as employees straightened their desks, polished computer screens, and rehearsed greetings under their breath. Reynolds himself had arrived an hour early, his face drawn from a sleepless night. He'd spent hours replaying his interaction with Anthony in his mind, cringing at the memory of his dismissive tone and assumptions. For the first time in years, his job security felt threatened, and the realization left him shaken. At precisely 9 o'clock, the glass door swung open and Anthony Wilson walked in, accompanied by 2 members of his executive team, Unlike the casual clothes from 2 days prior, today he wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that exuded authority. The branch fell silent as he entered, employees freezing mid-task to watch. Reynolds hurried forward, hand extended. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson. Welcome to Downtown Branch." His smile was strained, his handshake too firm, overcompensating for his previous lukewarm greeting. "Mr. Reynolds," Anthony acknowledged with a nod. "I'd like to start with a tour, followed by a meeting with your entire staff." "Of course, right away," Reynolds said, gesturing toward the teller line. "Shall we begin with our customer service area?" As they moved through the branch, Anthony introduced himself to each employee they encountered, asking questions about their roles and experience. Unlike Reynolds, who often referred to his staff by position rather than name, Anthony made a point of addressing each person directly. "Lisa, right?" he said to the young teller who had helped him 2 days ago. "You were very professional when I came in as a customer." "I appreciated that." Lisa blinked in surprise, recognizing him from his previous visit. "Thank you, sir. I didn't realize who you were." "That's exactly how it should be," Anthony replied with a warm smile. "Every customer deserves your best regardless of who they might be." The tour continued through the loan department, the safe deposit area, and finally to the personal banking offices. Throughout, Anthony took notes on a small tablet, occasionally pausing to ask questions or take photos of certain areas. Reynolds grew increasingly nervous with each note Anthony made. "Your break room is—" Anthony paused, searching for a diplomatic word as he looked at the cramped space with its single microwave and coffee maker that had clearly seen better days. "Inadequate," Reynolds finished for him. "Yes, I've requested upgrades several times, but budget constraints." Anthony nodded, making another note. "Staff well-being affects customer experience. We'll address this." He checked his watch. "Let's gather everyone in the conference room now." 20 minutes later, all 15 branch employees sat around the conference table, with Reynolds at one end and Anthony at the other. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension filling the room. "Thank you all for taking time away from your stations," Anthony began. "I know in banking every minute away from customers counts. But today marks the beginning of something important for this branch and for Westside Community Bank as a whole." He stood and walked slowly around the table. 2 days ago, I came into this branch as a regular customer. I was dressed casually and I asked about premium banking services. He paused near Lisa, who gave him a small smile of recognition. "Some of you treated me with respect and professionalism. Others," his eyes flicked briefly toward Reynolds, "made assumptions about me based on my appearance." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few employees glanced at Reynolds, whose face had reddened slightly. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," Anthony continued. "What happened was a symptom of a larger issue, not just in this branch, but in banking as a whole. We make snap judgments. We categorize people. We decide who deserves our best service and who doesn't. Sometimes these judgments are based on clothes, sometimes on a dress, sometimes on—" He let the implication hang in the air. "Other factors." He returned to his seat, opening his tablet. "Starting today, we're implementing changes. First, every employee will participate in our new customer service training program. It's not about scripts or upselling. It's about seeing each person who walks through that door as an individual worthy of respect." Anthony swiped through his tablet. "Second, we're renovating this branch. New customer waiting areas, updated technology, and yes, Mr. Reynolds, a proper break room for staff." This brought a few appreciative smiles from the employees. "Third, we're launching community outreach programs specific to this neighborhood. Financial literacy workshops, small business development seminars, first-time homebuyer assistance. Banking isn't just about transactions, it's about building community wealth and stability." He looked directly at Reynolds now. "And finally, we're reorganizing management structures. Mr. Reynolds will remain branch manager, but with a new focus." Reynolds' posture stiffened, anticipating bad news. "Starting next week, Mr. Reynolds will join me in visiting neighborhood centers, churches, and community organizations throughout the area. For the next month, he'll spend 3 days a week with me in the field, learning about the communities this branch serves but may have overlooked." The surprise on Reynolds' face was evident. This wasn't the punishment or demotion he had expected. "This isn't optional," Anthony added, his voice firm but not unkind. "It's necessary. You can't serve a community you don't understand." The meeting continued with more details about the changes coming to the branch. By the end, the mood had shifted from anxiety to cautious optimism. As staff returned to their positions, several approached Anthony to express enthusiasm for the new direction. Reynolds lingered after the others had gone, his expression a complex mixture of relief, embarrassment, and uncertainty. "Mr. Wilson," he began, clearing his throat, "I want to thank you for not firing me on the spot." Many would have. Anthony studied him for a moment. "Firing you would be easy, Mr. Reynolds, and completely unproductive. You've been with this bank for over 20 years. You know its systems, its customers, its strengths and weaknesses. That knowledge is valuable." He closed his tablet and looked Reynolds directly in the eye. "But knowledge without perspective is limited. You know banking, but you don't know all your customers. That's what needs to change." "The community visits," Reynolds said, nodding slowly. "I understand. Do you?" Anthony asked, genuinely curious. "Why do you think I'm doing this?" Reynolds hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "To show me that I've been narrow-minded, that I've been missing opportunities by overlooking certain customers." "That's part of it," Anthony agreed. "But it's more than missed business opportunities. It's about human dignity. Every person who walks into this bank deserves to be seen, to be respected, to be valued, regardless of their balance sheet." He paused, letting the words sink in. "When you dismissed me based on my appearance, you didn't just lose potential business. You diminished me as a person. You decided my worth without knowing anything about me." Reynolds's face flushed with shame. I'm truly sorry." "I believe you are," Anthony said. "But sorry isn't enough. Understanding is what matters now. Real, deep understanding of the harm these attitudes cause, and a genuine commitment to change." He stood, indicating the conversation was nearing its end. "Our first community visit is to the Riverside Senior Center on Monday morning. Many of their residents have been banking here for decades, but few have ever met the branch manager. Be ready at 8, Reynolds nodded. "I'll be there. One more thing," Anthony added as he gathered his things. "The young woman who helps with the after-school financial literacy program, Michelle, I believe?" "Yes, she volunteers at the high school twice a month," Reynolds confirmed, surprised that Anthony knew this detail. "She has excellent customer service scores and a natural talent for explaining complex concepts simply. Starting next month, I want her to lead the new community workshop program we're developing. She'll need mentorship and support." Reynolds blinked, processing the implication. Michelle was the youngest staff member, and one of the few people of color in the branch. He had overlooked her potential, filing her volunteer work under community relations without considering its value to the bank. "I'll work with her personally," Reynolds promised, a new understanding beginning to dawn. Anthony nodded, satisfied for now. "Good, I'll see you Monday." As Anthony left the branch, he noticed the small changes already taking place. Staff members were more attentive to customers. The water cooler had been restocked with cups, and there was a new energy in the air. It was just the beginning, he knew. Real change would take time, consistency, and genuine commitment. Outside, Diane was waiting by the car. "How did it go?" she asked as he approached. "Better than expected," Anthony replied, looking back at the bank. Through the glass doors, he could see Reynolds talking with Michelle, gesturing animatedly as she nodded and took notes. "I think there's hope for him yet. And if not?" Diane asked, always the pragmatist. Anthony shrugged, sliding into the car. "Then we'll find someone who shares our vision. This is too important to compromise on." As they drove away, Anthony felt a sense of cautious optimism. The real work was just beginning, not just at the downtown branch, but across the entire bank. Changing systems was relatively easy. Changing hearts and minds was the real challenge. But seeing the small shifts already taking place reinforced his belief that it was possible. "Next stop?" Diane asked, pulling into traffic. "The Cherry Street branch," Anthony decided. "Let's see if they treat casual customers any better than downtown did." Diane smiled knowingly. "Another incognito visit?" "Of course," Anthony replied, already planning his approach. After all, you never know who might walk through those doors. The early morning air was crisp as Thomas Reynolds waited outside the downtown branch. It had been 3 weeks since Anthony Wilson had become a fixture in his professional life, and each day brought new revelations, some uncomfortable, others unexpectedly inspiring. Today marked their 7th community visit, and Reynolds found himself checking his watch repeatedly. an unusual spark of anticipation replacing his initial dread of these outings. At precisely 8 o'clock, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Anthony stepped out, dressed more casually than usual in slacks and a light sweater. "Good morning, Reynolds," he called, his breath visible in the cool air. "Ready for today?" "Yes, sir," Reynolds replied, clutching a leather portfolio. "I reviewed the community profile you sent over. The Parkside neighborhood has one of the lowest banking participation rates in our service area." Anthony nodded approvingly. "And why do you think that is?" This had become their routine. Anthony constantly pushing Reynolds to look deeper, to question assumptions he'd held for decades. 3 weeks ago, Reynolds might have responded with statistics about income levels or education. Today he knew better. "Historical barriers," Reynolds answered. "Many residents have had negative experiences with financial institutions, often spanning generations. There's a fundamental lack of trust." "Exactly," Anthony said, opening the car door for Reynolds. "And trust isn't built through marketing campaigns or special offers. It's built through presence, through listening, through proving you're not just there to extract value but to create it." As they drove to the Parkside Community Center, Reynolds reflected on how these visits had changed him. The first one at the senior center had been awkward. He'd stood stiffly beside Anthony, smiling mechanically as elderly residents shared stories of how they'd been banking at Westside for 40 or 50 years, but had never met the branch manager. One woman had pointedly asked why the bank had removed the seating area where seniors used to rest while waiting for service. Reynolds hadn't even been aware it had existed, let alone been removed during a renovation 5 years earlier. The second visit to a small business association meeting had been even more eye-opening. Local shop owners had described their struggles getting business loans, how they'd been shuttled between departments or offered terms that would have made growth impossible. Anthony had listened intently, taking notes, occasionally glancing at Reynolds to gauge his reaction. Later, he'd asked Reynolds to pull the loan applications from these businesses. Reviewing them together, Anthony had pointed out how the standard metrics used for approval overlooked the strengths of these community businesses: their loyal customer base, their deep neighborhood connections, their resilience during economic downturns. "We're here," Anthony announced, pulling Reynolds from his thoughts. The Parkside Community Center was a modest brick building, with a colorful mural spanning one side. Inside, about 30 residents had gathered, ranging from young adults to seniors, the diversity of the neighborhood fully represented in the room. Anthony moved through the crowd with natural ease, introducing himself not as the bank owner but simply as Anthony from Westside Bank. He introduced Reynolds the same way, creating a level of informality that helped people open up. Rather than making a presentation, Anthony had set up small discussion tables where he and Reynolds could sit with community members and listen to their experiences. At Reynolds' table, a middle-aged woman named Grace spoke quietly about her son's struggle to buy his first home. "He has a good job as a hospital technician, saves every month, but the loan officer said his credit score wasn't high enough. No explanation of how to improve it, just a rejection letter." She looked directly at Reynolds. "He banks with you. Has for years. But when he needed help, really needed it, your bank just saw him as a number that wasn't high enough." Reynolds felt a familiar discomfort rising, the defensiveness that had characterized his early responses during these community visits. But something had shifted in him over the past weeks. Instead of explaining bank policy or credit requirements, he leaned forward. "That wasn't right," he said simply. "We failed your son, and I'd like to help fix it if I can." The surprise on Grace's face was evident. "You would?" "Yes. We're developing a first-time homebuyer program that includes credit counseling and specialized loan products. But more immediately, I'd like to meet with your son personally, not to make promises, but to understand his situation better and see what options might work." As the words left his mouth, Reynolds realized how differently he was thinking now. 3 weeks ago, he would have seen this as beyond his responsibilities as branch manager. Now it felt like exactly what his job should be. Across the room, Anthony watched the exchange, a small smile playing at his lips. He'd been observing Reynolds closely during their community visits, noting the gradual but significant changes in his responses and attitudes. What had begun as obligatory compliance was evolving into something more genuine. After 2 hours of discussions, Anthony and Reynolds thanked the community members and returned to the car. The drive back to the bank was quiet. both men processing what they'd heard. "You handled Grace's situation well," Anthony finally said as they neared downtown. "A month ago you might have explained bank policy to her." Reynolds nodded, gazing out the window. "A month ago I wouldn't have seen it as my problem to solve." He turned to Anthony. "I've been thinking about Michelle's community workshop program." "The one you asked me to support?" "What about it?" "It's good, but it's missing something. We're teaching budgeting and savings, but not addressing the trust gap. These workshops assume people want to bank with us, that they see value in traditional financial services. After today, I'm not sure that's true." Anthony raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "I think we need to start with listening sessions like today, but more focused on understanding what financial services people actually want and need, not what we think they should have." Reynolds spoke with growing animation. "And we need to bring loan officers and tellers to these sessions, not just managers. The people who interact with customers daily need to hear these stories firsthand." Anthony pulled into the bank parking lot and turned off the engine. "That's exactly right, Reynolds," he smiled. "And that's why I didn't fire you." Back at the branch, Reynolds found Michelle waiting for him. Materials for the upcoming workshop spread across his desk. "How was Parkside?" she asked, gathering her papers to make room for him. Instead of his usual brief summary, Reynolds sat down and shared everything. The stories they'd heard, the frustrations expressed, the ideas forming in his mind for a different approach. Michelle listened, her expression shifting from surprise to genuine interest. "That's actually really insightful," she said when he finished. "I've been thinking something similar about the workshops. They're not connecting with people the way I hoped." "Let's rework them together," Reynolds suggested, surprising himself with the offer. "Maybe start with a listening session at the high school where you volunteer. Teens have financial needs too, and they influence their families." For the next hour, Reynolds and Michelle reimagined the community outreach program, creating something far more interactive and responsive than the original plan. When Anthony walked by the office later, he paused at the door, watching as Reynolds and Michelle filled a whiteboard with ideas, their collaborative energy evident. That evening, as Reynolds drove home, he reflected on the strange journey of the past month. What had begun as the most humiliating moment of his career, failing to recognize the bank's new owner and treating him dismissively, had somehow transformed into an unexpected opportunity for growth. He was seeing his job, his community, and himself differently now. His phone buzzed with a text message from his wife. "How was today's community visit?" In the past, his response would have been brief and dismissive. "Fine." Tonight, he pulled into a parking lot to type a longer reply, describing the people he'd met, the stories he'd heard, and how they'd affected him. As he finished the message, another text from his wife appeared. "You seem different lately." "In a good way," Reynolds smiled, putting the phone down. He was different. And for the first time in years, he felt energized by his work, challenged in ways that mattered. The next morning, Reynolds arrived at the bank early. He had a list of customers to call, people who'd been declined for loans or services over the past year. Not to sell them anything, but to listen, to understand their needs better, and perhaps to find solutions that had been overlooked. As he settled at his desk, he noticed a small envelope with his name on it. Inside was a note from Anthony. "Community meeting tomorrow at Eastside Church. 8 a.m. Your lead this time." Reynolds read the note twice, a mixture of nervousness and pride rising within him. Being trusted to lead one of these sessions represented a level of confidence he hadn't expected Anthony to place in him so soon.